It was supposed to be a typical political talk show segment. Karoline Leavitt, the rising star in conservative circles, was booked to appear on a primetime TV program. On the other side of the stage was Jasmine Crockett, a fiery and outspoken, liberal representative, known for her sharp tongue and passionate political commentary. The two had clashed before in interviews, but nothing quite like this. As the cameras rolled, the audience could feel the electricity in the air. The topic of discussion: the future of America's economy under the influence of extreme political ideologies. But this time, there was something different. A sense that the conversation could spiral into something more personal. The host, trying to maintain control, introduced the topic with a light-hearted tone. But the moment Karoline and Jasmine locked eyes, the gloves were off. Karoline, poised and confident, greeted Jasmine with a smile that barely hid the sharpness of her words. "I'm excited to be here," she said, her tone calm, almost too calm. "But I'm curious how you plan to defend the out-of-control spending that's crippling this country." Jasmine Crockett, always quick to jump on an opportunity to counterattack, didn't waste a second. "Out-of-control spending? You mean the kind of policies that lifted millions out of poverty and stabilized the economy? You're out of touch. If you think that's what's hurting America," she shot back, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Karoline leaned forward slightly, as if weighing her next move carefully. The audience could sense it. There was a tension between them, building like a storm on the horizon. Both women were known for their quick thinking, and they had no plans of backing down. But in that moment, something shifted. Karoline's expression grew more serious, her eyes narrowing as she looked directly at Jasmine. Was this really about policy anymore? Or was there something more personal at play? As the host tried to regain control of the conversation, Karoline took a deep breath and leaned into the microphone. Her next words were calculated, but they held a weight that made the audience sit up straighter in their seats. "You know, Jasmine, I respect that you have your opinions," Karoline began, her voice a calm contrast to the rising tension in the room. "But it's hard to take someone seriously when they're so willing to overlook the consequences of their actions. You've been in office long enough to see what your side's policies are doing to the very people you claim to be helping. It's not just about the economy. It's about people's lives, and you're playing a dangerous game with their futures." The host shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing the direction this was heading. But it was too late. Karoline had already stepped into the ring, and there was no turning back. She had just dropped a bombshell, and the room was dead silent. Jasmine, usually so quick with a retort, hesitated. The venomous look in Karoline's eyes was enough to make anyone second-guess their next words. For a moment it seemed like Jasmine might back down, but then, just as quickly, she squared her shoulders and fired back. "You're preaching to the choir here, Karoline," Jasmine said, her voice gaining strength. "But you and I both know that what you're really upset about isn't the policies. It's the fact that people like you are losing control. You don't like that people are finally getting the help they deserve, and that's what's eating at you." Karoline's lips curled into a slight smile, but it was cold. Nothing like the smile she'd given when she first entered the studio. "I don't think it's about losing control, Jasmine. I think it's about seeing what your policies have done to the working class. Policies that have burdened them, not helped them. You might be comfortable with your rhetoric, but the people I represent are suffering." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and for a moment it seemed as if Jasmine might go for the jugular. But instead, she shot back with a pointed question of her own, one that seemed designed to goad Karoline into a mistake. "Is this really about the working class?" Jasmine asked, leaning in with a smirk. "Or is it about your party losing its grip on power, Karoline? Let's not pretend this is about anything other than politics." But Karoline, with her unshakable calm, didn't flinch. She met Jasmine's gaze directly, unblinking. The audience, who had been watching this exchange unfold with growing intensity, could feel the weight of the moment. It was no longer just about politics. It was about something deeper, a clash of ideals, a collision of worlds. What would Karoline say next? Would she let Jasmine's taunt slide? Or would she unleash the comeback that had everyone on the edge of their seats? The tension in the room was palpable. The cameras zoomed in as the two women faced off, neither willing to give an inch. Karoline's calm demeanor remained unshaken, while Jasmine's fiery energy seemed to escalate with every passing second. The host, clearly uncomfortable, glanced back and forth between them, trying to steer the conversation back to a more neutral ground. But both women knew that the show had already taken a turn. This wasn't about policy anymore. This was about something much more personal. Jasmine, sensing a slight crack in Karoline's composed exterior, pressed forward. "So, Karoline, tell me, how do you justify your party's failure to provide real solutions for the people who need them the most?" Her voice was cutting, almost mocking. "You've spent years pointing fingers, but when it comes time to offer real help, where's the action?" It was a direct jab at Karoline's political career, a deliberate attempt to throw her on the defensive. But what Jasmine didn't realize was that she had underestimated Karoline's ability to read the room, to pick up on the smallest cues, and to strike with precision when the moment was right. For a brief moment, Karoline stayed silent, her gaze unwavering as she absorbed Jasmine's words. Was this the moment to unleash her comeback? The audience held their breath, waiting for the next move. And then it happened. Karoline leaned forward, eyes never leaving Jasmine's, and with a slow, deliberate tone, she spoke. "You know, Jasmine," she began, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "It's easy to point fingers when you've never had to actually deal with the fallout of your own policies. It's easy to stand there in your bubble, insulated from the consequences, and criticize everyone else. But the people who suffer under your so-called solutions, those are the ones who really know the truth." The room fell into a stunned silence. Karoline's words cut deep, and for the first time, Jasmine's confident facade seemed to crack. The audience could feel it, the sting of Karoline's comeback, the sheer force behind it. It was a savage blow, one that left Jasmine temporarily speechless. But Karoline wasn't done. She wasn't just making a statement. She was delivering a truth that Jasmine couldn't easily dismiss. "You've been in politics long enough to know that it's not about what sounds good on paper. It's about what actually works for the people you're supposed to represent. And right now, your party is all talk and no action. You want to help people? Then start by facing the reality of what your policies are doing to their lives." Jasmine's eyes flashed with anger. This wasn't the response she had been expecting, and it rattled her more than she cared to admit. She had always prided herself on her quick wit and ability to shut down opponents with a single retort. But Karoline had just flipped the script. What was supposed to be a political sparring match had turned into a personal attack, and the impact was undeniable. The host, sensing that the dynamic had shifted, tried to interject, but Karoline held up a hand, signaling for him to give her a moment. This was her time to take control of the conversation. "You think you have all the answers, Jasmine," Karoline continued, her voice growing firmer with every word. "But what happens when those answers fail? What happens when people realize that your policies only make their struggles worse?" Jasmine, now visibly flustered, attempted to regain her composure, but the damage had been done. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. For the first time in the interview, she looked unsure, hesitant, completely thrown off balance. The audience could feel the shift in the room. Karoline wasn't just debating Jasmine. She was challenging everything Jasmine stood for. And then, as if to add insult to injury, Karoline leaned back in her chair, her expression one of quiet triumph. "You know," she said with a smirk, "it's not easy admitting you're wrong, but maybe one day you'll realize that your way isn't the right way. And when that day comes, I'll be here, waiting." The finality of her words hung in the air, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. Jasmine, still speechless, had no response. The cameras zoomed out, capturing the stunned expressions on the faces of the audience. It was clear Karoline Leavitt had won this round. For the first time in a long time, Jasmine Crockett found herself without an answer. The audience, still processing the savage blow they had just witnessed, erupted into whispers. Had Karoline really just humiliated her live on national television? As the cameras cut to a commercial break, Karoline stood tall, unshaken. She had said what needed to be said. The question now was, how would Jasmine respond? As the commercial break ended and the cameras returned to the live broadcast, the energy in the studio had completely shifted. The audience, still processing the aftermath of Karoline's stunning comeback, was visibly uneasy. They had witnessed something extraordinary, something that hadn't just been a battle of ideas, but a clash of personalities. And in that moment, it was clear who had come out on top. Jasmine Crockett, who had once been so confident and brimming with fiery determination, now appeared rattled. Her usual sharpness seemed dulled, her eyes darting around the stage as if searching for the words that would put her back in control. But the truth was, she was struggling. Karoline, on the other hand, was sitting comfortably in her chair, calm and composed, as though she hadn't just delivered a verbal knockout. The coolness in her demeanor was palpable, and for the first time the audience saw her in a new light, not just as a rising star in conservative politics, but as someone who could stand toe-to-toe with anyone, even the fiercest opponents. The host, sensing the shift, attempted to regain control of the conversation, but it was clear that the dynamic had changed. "Well, that was certainly a heated exchange," he said, trying to lighten the mood. "Jasmine, would you like to respond?" Jasmine opened her mouth, but the words didn't come out right away. She paused, her face flushed with frustration. The smile she had once worn so confidently was now gone, replaced by a tight-lipped expression. She knew she had been bested. There was no denying it. Karoline's words had hit her harder than she had anticipated, and she hadn't been prepared for the emotional toll it had taken. She had underestimated her opponent, and now, in front of millions of viewers, it was clear who had the upper hand. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of silence, Jasmine spoke, though her voice was less certain than usual. I think we can all agree that there's more to the conversation than what's been said here today," she began, her tone defensive but lacking the usual fire. "I'm not going to sit here and pretend that everything's perfect. But Karoline's right about one thing. There are real people out there struggling, and we need solutions that go beyond political posturing." Karoline's eyes narrowed slightly as Jasmine spoke, but she didn't interrupt. She wasn't going to let her guard down. This wasn't about letting Jasmine have the last word. It was about maintaining the advantage she had so clearly gained. When Jasmine finished speaking, Karoline leaned in, her voice steady and unwavering. "Solutions," Karoline repeated, her gaze never leaving Jasmine's. "I think we all agree that solutions are what people need. But what kind of solutions are you offering, Jasmine? More government spending? More red tape? That's not helping anyone. The only thing it's doing is making it harder for hardworking Americans to get ahead. You've spent so long championing policies that sound good on paper, but the reality is they don't work." The words hit like a hammer, and Jasmine flinched. The audience, sensing the tension rising again, waited with bated breath. Karoline had the stage now, and she wasn't going to let go of it. Jasmine's attempt at regaining her footing had failed, and Karoline wasn't going to let her off the hook that easily. "You're right about one thing, though," Karoline continued, her voice still calm but laced with steel. "We need solutions. But real solutions come from understanding the problems and facing them head-on, not pretending that throwing money at the problem is going to fix everything. You can't solve a broken system by throwing more of the same at it." The audience was stunned into silence. The verbal jousting had turned into a full-blown one-sided argument, and there was no way to deny who was winning. Jasmine's words were now faltering, her earlier confidence nowhere to be found. Karoline had done more than make a point. She had made it personal, and in the process, she had taken control of the entire conversation. For a brief moment, Jasmine opened her mouth to speak again, but she quickly closed it. There was nothing left to say. Karoline had dismantled her argument piece by piece, and she knew it. And then, as if to punctuate her victory, Karoline smiled, a slow, almost imperceptible smile that was more about quiet triumph than arrogance. "You'll get there, Jasmine," she said, her voice dripping with thinly veiled sarcasm. "Maybe one day you'll understand that it's not just about who yells the loudest, it's about who actually delivers results." The host, sensing the end of this verbal showdown, tried to shift the conversation to a new topic. But the damage had been done. Jasmine's response had been weak, and Karoline had delivered the final blow. The audience, who had been on edge throughout the entire exchange, could finally exhale. The battle was over, and there was no doubt who had emerged victorious. As the show moved on to other segments, viewers at home continued to talk about what they had just witnessed. The video of Karoline's savage comeback spread like wildfire across social media, and soon the hashtag Karoline Leavitt Savage was trending. It wasn't just a debate anymore. It was an event, one that would be talked about for years to come. But the question lingered in the air. Had Karoline just changed the political landscape with one devastating response? Or had she simply proven that sometimes words are more powerful than actions? The days following the televised exchange were nothing short of chaotic. The clip of Karoline's savage comeback had gone viral. Social media was ablaze, with thousands of users expressing their shock and admiration for Karoline's performance. The hashtag Karoline Leavitt Savage continued to trend, and soon clips of her comeback were being shared across platforms, analyzed in think pieces, and discussed by commentators. For Jasmine Crockett, the aftermath wasn't as celebratory. Public opinion had shifted dramatically. She had entered the conversation as a rising star, but now she was the subject of ridicule. People couldn't stop talking about how she had been blindsided on live television, her argument shattered, in real time by Karoline's calculated precision. But Jasmine was not one to back down easily. Behind closed doors, she fumed. Her team scrambled to formulate a response, to find some way to salvage her public image. She had built her career on being a fierce advocate, someone who could hold her own in any political debate. But what had happened in that studio? How had she been so utterly blindsided? Jasmine's advisors advised her to stay calm, to wait for the right moment to strike back. The public eye, they insisted, was always on her now. A hasty, emotional reaction would only fuel the fire. But the tension was undeniable. The sting of Karoline's words still lingered in Jasmine's mind. She couldn't let it go. She needed to take back control. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt's name continued to soar in popularity. She had been lauded not just for her political stance, but for her strength in standing up to someone like Jasmine. Her performance on live TV had solidified her reputation as a force to be reckoned with. Her political opponents were now faced with a new question. How do you prepare for someone who doesn't just argue with facts, but takes the emotional punch right to the heart of your credibility? Karoline was aware of the growing buzz around her comeback. She could feel the shift in public perception. Her phone rang non-stop, messages flooding in from people congratulating her, asking for interviews, seeking her opinion on national issues. But despite the growing attention, Karoline remained focused. This wasn't just about a one-time victory. It was about sending a clear message. She wasn't someone who could be easily intimidated or dismissed. And she wasn't done yet. The spotlight was now firmly on Karoline, and she was determined to make the most of it. She had faced down one of the fiercest political opponents in the game and come out on top. It was time for her to leverage this moment, to solidify her place as a rising political star. But she knew that the challenge was only beginning. Jasmine wasn't going to let her win without a fight. Karoline had delivered the final blow, but the battle was far from over. For Karoline, this moment had proven that politics wasn't just about policy. It was about presence, power, and the ability to dominate a conversation when it mattered most. But the media frenzy also made one thing clear. Karoline Leavitt was now a name that everyone knew. As Karoline's team brainstormed next steps, she found herself thinking about the bigger picture. This exchange with Jasmine had opened the door to more opportunities than she could have imagined. Invitations to national talk shows were pouring in, and even some of her more conservative colleagues were praising her for the way she had handled herself under pressure. But Karoline wasn't thinking about just political advancement. She was thinking about the deeper implications of the debate. Was this just a momentary victory? Or had it signaled a shift in the way people viewed political debates in general? Was it possible that viewers had grown tired of scripted talking points and wanted something more? Someone who wasn't afraid to speak the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be? Karoline had given them that, and they had responded in kind. The next few days were filled with media interviews, think pieces, and even a few parodies of the infamous exchange. Karoline's team worked tirelessly to maintain the momentum, crafting speeches and statements that would keep her name front and center. But no matter how many interviews she did, how many debates she participated in, there was one thing that remained undeniable. The moment on live TV with Jasmine Crockett had changed everything. For Jasmine, however, the road ahead was more complicated. She couldn't let the fallout go unanswered. The media scrutiny, the whispers behind her back, the fact that her credibility had been shaken to its core. It was a weight that only she could carry. Her handlers were urging her to take action, to address the public head-on, and show that she was still a force to be reckoned with. But how could she recover from such a devastating blow? What could she possibly say that would restore the confidence that had been lost in an instant? The pressure was mounting, and the days following the debate were filled with internal conflict. Jasmine needed to find her footing again, whether that meant publicly confronting Karoline or taking a different approach altogether. The one thing she knew for sure was that this defeat was not something she could ignore. The political world had been thrown into disarray, and both Karoline and Jasmine knew that the fight was far from over. For now, Karoline stood victorious. But for how long? And would Jasmine make a comeback of her own? The stage was set for the next chapter in their rivalry. Weeks passed, and the anticipation in the political world continued to mount. Karoline Leavitt had become a household name. She had made a mark on national television that few could forget, and her strategic comeback against Jasmine Crockett remained the talk of the town. Her rise to prominence seemed unstoppable, but even the brightest stars have to face the storm. Jasmine, however, had been preparing. Behind the scenes, she had spent countless hours refining her strategy, learning from her mistakes and listening to the public's reactions. The sting of that defeat still lingered, but now it was fueling her determination. She couldn't afford another failure, not in front of the nation. This was her moment for redemption, and she wasn't about to let Karoline's words be the last she spoke in this debate. A highly anticipated second live TV debate was scheduled, and both women were set to face off once again. The stakes were higher this time, both for their political careers and for their personal reputations. The nation was watching, eager to see if Jasmine could reclaim her ground or if Karoline would continue her dominant streak. As the night of the debate approached, the tension between Karoline and Jasmine was palpable. Media outlets were buzzing with speculation, polls were conducted, and pundits weighed in on who had the upper hand. But this time, the atmosphere was different. There was a sense of finality to it, a feeling that the winner of this showdown would solidify their place as a powerful force in politics. The debate began with a sharp contrast from their last encounter. This time, Jasmine was ready. She had taken the lessons from her previous encounter to heart. Her words were carefully chosen, her tone calculated. As soon as she opened her mouth, it was clear she had shed the uncertainty that had marred their last exchange. You know, Caroline, Jasmine began, a confident smile curling at the edges of her lips, I respect your passion, but let's talk about reality. Let's talk about what really matters to the people. Caroline, however, wasn't rattled. She knew that Jasmine was trying to regain control, but she wasn't going to give it up that easily. Reality, Jasmine? Caroline's voice was sharp, cutting through the air. Let's talk about what your reality really looks like. More bureaucracy, more taxes, more control. Is that really what America needs? Or do we need something different? Something that actually empowers the people? The crowd went silent. This was it. The clash they had been waiting for. The sharp, biting exchanges began to flow, each woman trying to outdo the other with arguments, facts, and rapid-fire responses. But it wasn't just a battle of policy anymore. It had become personal. Caroline's eyes were locked on Jasmine, her every word loaded with precision. She had learned from their last confrontation and wasn't about to let her guard down. Jasmine, sensing the pressure building, tried to shift the narrative. Caroline, your way of doing things has only led to chaos and division. Your so-called solutions don't address the real issues. What are you going to do about the rising costs of healthcare? The real struggles that people are facing? Are you just going to ignore them? It was a strong move, but Caroline didn't flinch. Jasmine, you've spent your entire career blaming others. But let me tell you something. When people don't have the freedom to make their own choices, they lose. What I'm offering is not just a policy change, it's a way to restore personal freedom. Healthcare won't be fixed by government control. It will be fixed when we give people the opportunity to thrive, to make their own decisions. The debate was heating up, each woman trying to land the next knockout punch. But then, as the debate reached its peak, something unexpected happened. The host, sensing that the exchange was spiraling, attempted to diffuse the tension by asking a question that seemed innocent enough, but it opened the door for one last dramatic turn. All right, ladies, the host interjected. Let's take a moment to talk about what's really at stake here. Both of you have spoken about the future of America. But what does that future look like to you personally? What is your vision for this country? Caroline didn't hesitate. My vision is a future where people have the power to make their own decisions, a future where individuals are empowered to control their own destinies, where government isn't standing in the way, but instead supporting people in achieving their potential. Jasmine, however, was ready for the question. She leaned in, her voice steady. My vision is one of unity, a future where everyone has access to the resources they need to succeed, no matter their background. A country that lifts each other up, not tears each other down. But Caroline wasn't done. She leaned forward, her eyes locked onto Jasmine's with a piercing gaze. Unity is a noble idea, Jasmine, but it's an illusion if you don't recognize the power of individual freedom. You can't unify people by forcing them into a mold. They don't want to fit. The future of America is about letting people choose their own path. And if you can't see that, then I fear you've already lost. It was a bombshell. The room fell into stunned silence as Caroline's words hung in the air. Jasmine, for the first time in this debate, seemed taken aback. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The tension in the air was so thick, it was almost tangible. The audience, holding their breath, knew that this wasn't just another debate. It was the moment that would define both women's political futures. In the end, the debate ended in a decisive silence. Jasmine couldn't find her footing again, her earlier momentum completely lost. Caroline's words had left an indelible mark, and even the host, sensing the finality of the moment, ended the debate with an almost reverential tone. Thank you, ladies. What an intense and thought-provoking discussion. Caroline had done it again. She had not just defended her position, she had obliterated her opponents. The aftermath of this debate would send shockwaves through the political world. Karoline Leavitt had proven, without a shadow of a doubt, that she was more than just a formidable force. She was a political heavyweight. And Jasmine Crockett? Her reputation had been tarnished beyond repair. The nation would not soon forget this final showdown. Karoline had claimed victory, not just for herself, but for the ideals she championed. Her comeback had not only been savage, it had been decisive, and in that moment, she had cemented her place at the top of the political ladder.